happens when you make plans, right? Not everything always works out the way you intended it. Welcome back. Welcome back. Here I am. Here I am. Here I am. Ugh. There you go. So I am back. I hope you all are gradually rejoining. There you go. We're back. I got super chats to answer from the previous live. Got plenty of things to talk about. So welcome back. Glad you're here. I know it's going to take a while to pop back in, but it looks like we can't do it from the bookshelf in the living room, unfortunately. There are other things that are pressing. So there you go. Here I am. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. I see 31st Century Socialism. Welcome, 31st Century Socialism. We lost the bookshelf. Yeah, it's a tragedy, but these things happen. We will survive. I can assure you all those books are still there, even though you cannot see them. So there you go. But hey, life happens. So we're here in the bedroom like we are other times. I'm still wearing my lovely tie. I've still got plenty of unnamed diet beverage, and we're going to keep going. We'll keep talking about what we're talking about. So if somebody wants to post the link in the chat or tweet this out, that would be back. That would be great. Would be good. I see that folks got the notification. So there you go. There you go, folks. I've got my unnamed diet beverage. I've still got my unnamed diet beverage. We can go for another hour here, probably. For another hour, we can talk, and that should be fine. Didn't anticipate some events that just went down. I still have everyone's super chat questions, so have no fear. They will get answered. Welcome back. Thank you for your patience, folks, right? This is what happens when, look, I don't have a high-tech production budget. I don't have a studio with which to film. I just do it all from my home. No, the FBI did not raid my home. The FBI are a little less polite when they come in. I think, my wife came in, she opened the door. The FBI, I think it's like, they kick your door open, or, the squad team in your face, or if it's a knock raid, they knock first. I don't know. I've never had my home raided by the FBI, so I have no idea, but it's kind of humorous that you bring that up. But we're here, and we're going to have our conversation. Yeah, let folks keep piling back in. Oh boy, it was a fun stream while I was sitting there in front of the bookshelf, and it'll keep being a fun stream. Look, folks, I'm a real guy, okay? And that's the thing that people don't get. Like, a lot of people think this is all just like a performance, right? That I'm on here and I'm just like, I'm doing my best impression of like a crazy leftist or something, right? And that I'm really just a white supremacist. That's the allegation. That's what they constantly say on BreadTube, is that I'm actually, some right-wing white supremacist, and I sit there and I do this impression of a leftist. But this is reality. Look, I was doing a live stream, didn't realize my wife was coming home and needed to use the living room. So there you go. Hey, and if you're a fan, my wife, she does like a weekly live stream. Every Wednesday at 4, she does a live stream where she reads children's books in Spanish. So if you want to check that out, right? If you're into children's books in Spanish and all of that, she'll be live from the other room. We'll have simultaneous lives going at 4 o'clock. So that's how wild it'll be. So there you go. Again, I'm a real guy. I'm a real dude. This is my real life. And my real wife just walked into my real apartment. And I'm way more real. I'm way more real, than most of these people, right? I didn't get this job from Central Casting. I'm a real guy. I went to real demonstrations, did real organizing. I work for a real TV company. I've traveled to real countries around the world. I am much more authentic than a lot of my competitors in the internet socialist, milieu. I really doubt Chapo Trap House has ever stopped one of their lives because their wife came home and kicked them out of the bookshelf room. But that's because I'm real. That's the cost of being real, right? If you're fake, you can have a much smoother production, right? I like to wear suits and I like to be very professional about things. But look, if you're filming with your iPhone from your one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, sometimes you get interrupted. So here I am. My face is redder than it normally is. But there you go. So I'm here. The super chat questions have been preserved. They haven't been forgotten, so don't worry about that. Still got the unnamed diet beverage. We lost the bookshelf, but we will survive. Thanks for rejoining this live stream. Welcome back, everybody. Hit the like button again. Hit the hit the notifications bell again so you get notified. A lot of you are here only because of the notifications. Tweet this out. Let people know the conversation has not ended. We're going to go for at least another hour here until at least 4:30, maybe a little bit later. And then I've got to get to the office because I'll be covering Biden's speech tonight, the big speech. Biden didn't give a State of the Union. It's not technically a State of the Union if you're just elected. Biden didn't give a speech to Congress, and he will be giving one finally tonight. So, someone's asking if I've thought of getting some studio lights. Well, Pasta Bazooka, look at that. Right now with the sunlight, it's probably not a good thing. But yes, I do have studio lights on this tripod. So there you go. But there you go. So folks, just keep piling back in. Where did I leave off? I was talking about this being like the last days of American imperialism, the last days of empire. Remember that? I think that's where I left off, and all the hardship that people suffer, and I think that's where I left off. And that's very true, right? I mean, we are entering a period where capitalism could actually be dismantled. Now, for those of you who may be new, I have many times articulated that I am an advocate of a peaceful transition to socialism. A peaceful transition to socialism. A peaceful transition. Now, why is it that I make that point about a peaceful transition to socialism? Why is it that I constantly make the point that we need a peaceful transition to socialism? Why is it? Because violence is a horrific thing. It is a horrific part of working class life in the United States. The United States is a very, very violent country. I think I just made you a mod, Harold. The United States is a very violent country. Right? We have the wars that go on around the world. It's been just a constant reality of U.S. society. There is crime in working class neighborhoods. There is domestic violence in working class households. There's police brutality, and violence is not a good thing. And the romanticization of violence, the admiration of violence, the getting excited about violence is a very juvenile and middle-class trend, right? In the socialist movement, you'll see that. The people that are very, very, very excited about violence, they want to go out and be violent and engage in revolutionary violence. And that's based on a kind of juvenile, it's LARPing, right? They want to be an action hero. They want to be in an action movie. But it's very juvenile, and it's not scientific. Working class people generally turn to socialism to end the violence. It's capitalism that is making their life unstable. It's capitalism that is creating instability and chaos in society. And they turn to socialism because they want to get out of the violence. They want to get to a peaceful society. They want to get to a society without the instability, without the fear. And so if revolutionaries and Marxists go around saying that they advocate violence, the response generally is working class people will look the other way and they won't be interested. Plus, at the same time, if you go around advocating violence, if you go around encouraging people to be violent, saying that what it means to be a socialist is to be violent, if you do that, generally that will enable the government to repress you, right? Because it's illegal to engage in violence. If you try to violently overthrow the U.S. government, they have every right to lock you in jail because that's how state power works. If you try to overthrow the state, if you try to overthrow a state, the state will repress you. That's generally how these things work. So communists, scientific socialists, those who really understand Marxism, not left adventurers, not anarchists, but general scientific socialists, have always advocated a peaceful transition to socialism. However, they have recognized that the capitalists and the ruling class of the United States, the billionaire bankers, may force a situation, may force a violent revolution to occur. But that will not be the choosing of socialists. That will not be the preference of socialists. That will be the actions of the capitalists, right? And that is an important point. In Spain, the communists got democratically elected to the Spanish Republic, the parliament. And the capitalists resorted to violence, launched the Spanish Civil War, and had Franco, the fascist dictator, come in. Abraham Lincoln was elected peacefully. right? A peaceful, fair election. Didn't even want to end slavery. But the slave owners were so threatened at the prospect of losing their property that they engaged in violence against Abraham Lincoln. And you had the Second American Revolution that was a response to the call for, to the violence of the slaveholders in order to defend their system of owning human beings, right? In Venezuela, you had the peaceful election of Hugo Chavez, and then the violent attempted coup of the capitalists, and they were forced to beat back the coup. You had an uprising of rank and file soldiers. And there is a whole lot of writing. The Bolsheviks wrote extensively about why, even in czarist conditions, where it was illegal to peacefully organize, where you could go to prison or even get executed for handing out a leaflet, that even in the czarist autocracy, it was not correct to engage in terrorism, right? The terrorist method that was used by the anarchists, that was used by Lenin's older brother, was rejected by the Bolsheviks. They rejected the use of terrorism to achieve their ends because it doesn't work, and because it's not scientific, and because it alienates the masses, because it enables political repression. That there is a difference, Karl Marx even wrote about, between the theories of Louis Auguste Blanqui and the theories of Karl Marx, right? Louis Auguste Blanqui, people jokingly called him the surprise communist, right? That he said that the communists could have a military coup, seize control of the government, and then from on high announce that they were socialists. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? Socialism is about empowering the broad masses of people. And if there's not a mass base, a mass movement of working people ready to take control of society, if there's not a mass, well-organized, core of society dedicated to the socialist project, you cannot declare socialism from above. And so the coup, the Blanquism, right? The Punchism, right? That's in German, the German word for coup is Putsch, right? Putschism, Blanquism, left adventurism, these are things that socialists reject. And if you look at the great socialist revolutions of the 20th century, sometimes they were violent. In fact, I would say most of the time they were violent. But that was because the road of peaceful revolution was cut off, and because the ability to peacefully organize had played itself out. For example, the Russian Revolution, right? You had the Tsar was toppled, and it was a widespread uprising in society supported by some of the most powerful capitalists because the Tsar was losing the war and because he was an embarrassment with the whole, thing with Rasputin, and all that. And so you had an uprising in society against the Tsarist autocracy. And then there was a division about continuing the war or opposing the war. The Soviets, these workers' councils, had been created in the uprising. And then you saw the Kornilov reaction. General Kornilov threatened to overthrow, the Soviets and crush the Soviets, right? He wanted to overthrow the provisional government, establish a military regime. The Kornilov affair, the Kornilov reaction. So in defense of the provisional government and in defense of the democratic rights of the workers to maintain their Soviets and their unions and their organizations, and the Bolsheviks formed self-defense militias, and pretty soon their army was bigger than the army of the provisional government. And it was just shortly after the defeat of the Kornilov reaction that the dual government structure the Bolsheviks had created declared itself to be the government. The Bolshevik Revolution was an act of self-defense. And it was the Bolsheviks had been involved in a general uprising to bring down the Tsar, and they peacefully organized these Soviets and councils. And then when there was an attempt, at setting up a fascist regime and brutally suppressing them, they defended themselves, and that's how they came to power. And the same goes for China, right? In China, the Chinese communists joined the KMT party, the Kuomintang, the KMT nationalist movement. They joined it. They were a big faction in the Chinese nationalist movement and the KMT government of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And then when Chiang Kai-shek started slaughtering them and brutally repressing communists, they fled to the countryside and engaged in self-defense. And the People's War began when the ability of communists to peacefully participate in the nationalist government was cut off. And even after that, when Japan invaded China, they formed an alliance with Chiang Kai-shek and with the nationalist KMT against the Japanese invaders. And then after the Second World War, they wanted to form a unified government with communists and KMT nationalists in it. Chiang Kai-shek would not allow that. And so in response to Chiang Kai-shek not allowing the communists to form their own, government and to be part of the government, in response to that, you did have the Civil War and ultimately Mao declaring the People's Republic. But the Trotskyites like to make fun of Mao. There's actually a book called The Mao Myth by one of the big Trots, where they say Mao was constantly, they said that even as Chiang Kai-shek was fleeing, he was standing on the shore shouting, "Come back, form a government." Well, that's true, right? And that was correct, right? Communists do not advocate a violent revolution. Violent revolutions happen because capitalists force a violent revolution and cut off the road of peaceful means. And, the Cuban Revolution, again, you had a brutal dictatorship that prevented people from peacefully organizing. So you had a general democratic uprising called the July 26th movement. And as the general democratic uprising, overthrew the dictatorship, established, a revolutionary democratic government, and as they began to take economic measures and reforms, at first the United States liked Fidel Castro, called him, a Democrat, the George Washington of Cuba, etc. But as he started taking economic measures to improve the lives of Cubans and nationalizing property, at that point, then you saw attempts to sabotage the Cuban Revolution, and the Cuban Revolution moved towards socialism out of necessity, right? And there's many examples of this. I mean, read the program of the Korean Workers' Party. I have a copy somewhere of Kim Il-sung's speeches, and if you read the program on which the Korean Workers' Party took power, it's a very modest program: national health care, confiscate the property of the Japanese collaborators, land for the farmers, right? And that often these so-called violent revolutions are the result of peaceful revolution and peaceful transition being tried over and over and over again, with the capitalists responding with the most extreme violence and the workers continuing to have to take up arms to protect themselves from extreme fascist terror and violence, only to ultimately, through their self-defense, establish a new government. Communists are not advocates of violent revolution, and this makes people angry when you talk about it. They're like, no, this is what, and I'm telling you, right, that get past the LARPing, get past the romanticization of violence, and realize that communists are defenders of peace. Communists are responsible. We are worker politicians. We enter the political process as workers on our own behalf, on the behalf of our own class, and when we do that, when we engage in efforts to build a peaceful democratic alternative to capitalism, when we do that, often we are met with violence, and we do recognize that people have the right to defend themselves. Labor unions, when they were being violently attacked by company thugs, they would form militias to protect their offices and to protect their picket lines. Right? The Black Panthers, when their people were enduring police brutality, following the laws of the state of California at the time, they engaged in armed patrols to engage in self-defense. Communists are not opposed to self-defense. Never have communists opposed self-defense, right? That people, when they're being slaughtered, when they're being attacked, when they're being murdered, they have the right to say no. They have the right to push back. They have the right to say, we're not going to just sit back and let you kill us. And that process of self-defense is generally what leads to revolutions. And often what happens is that as the people are in motion, and as there's a huge layer of society that is embracing the socialist program, that elements of the old state, elements of the military, elements of the police come over to the side of the people and their democratic rights and their right to continue to peacefully organize. And that happened in Venezuela, that happened in Russia, that happened in China. And that, for a revolution to actually succeed, it has to be a broad movement of all of society with millions of people in motion, embracing the revolutionary program and the revolutionary message. And on the basis of that program, joining the political process. That's generally how revolutions happen. They do not happen because people engage in terrorism. They do not happen because people launch armed attacks, They do not happen because people go around advocating a civil war, advocating violence. And this is an important, very, very important point. So much confusion over this basic point. But if you are a communist, if you are a socialist, if you're a scientific Marxist, you should be saying at the top of your lungs, we advocate peace. We want a peaceful transition to socialism. If you are an actual scientific Marxist, you will do that. Again, a lot of the nuance gets lost. I've noticed that this is a recurring theme on, that a lot of the things that I say are intended to be provocative, and coming from a place of knowing Marxism with a great deal of depth. Whereas the people who react to what I say generally have a caricature in their head of what Marxism is, and they are embracing the right-wing mischaracterization of Marxist ideas, number one. Number two, they are also, at the same time, they are generally, very, very reactive. They want to prove they're smarter than other people. But, for example, the socialist billionaires point is based on an understanding of Marxian economics, that the goal of socialism is vast material abundance, and you cannot cap the level of prosperity in society at what billionaires have in our time. I don't know what that is, Travis. I really don't know what that is. You cannot oppose growth and oppose prosperity and be a socialist. Now, in order to understand, you have to understand Marxism. If your understanding of Marxism is, some people have a lot of money, and some people don't have a lot of money, that's unfair. So we want to, take control of the government and divide up the wealth equally. If that's what you think Marxism is, when I saying abolish billionaires is anti-Marxist, you people lose their minds, right? But it's about actually having a scientific understanding of that. When I say that Marxists have always opposed violent revolution, again, if your characterization of what a Marxist is, you saw this newsreel of, Bolshevik soldiers in long coats, seizing the Winter Palace, and then you say, well, that's crazy, right? But again, this is based on a higher level of understanding. And that's what I'm trying to do with these streams, is I'm trying to get you to have a higher level of understanding of what Marxism is about. I'm trying to get you to understand these things. And that is why I have continued to raise the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families. I've raised that slogan because that is a slogan upon which a broad mass democratic movement against capitalism could be built. That kind of slogan could actually mobilize a broad democratic movement against capitalism. Getting millions of Americans to understand that the state and the government has an obligation to fight for them and improve their lives in the face of the breakdown of capitalism. Doing that and getting a broad mobilization that we need the state to control the means of production. Doing that is the basis for a kind of broad democratic movement that could have representation within the state, could begin to enact policies, and could lead us toward the transition to a socialist society. Okay, so language, Wittgenstein, socialist. All right. Now, I have laid out a 4-point program, a 4-point economic program, that if people were to rally around in mass, that could lay the basis for a transition to socialism. And I will quickly go over it, and then we'll do our roll call, and then I'll answer your super chats, and that will be our show for today, as wild as it's been. So let me quickly go over the 4-point program that could lead to the transition to socialism in the United States. The first step is massive reconstruction of the country. Obama said he was going to do this when he got into office. Didn't do it. Talked about bridges being secure, talked about water treatment facilities, that are not good. He talked about crumbling roads, and he didn't do it. He didn't fix it. Right? He went to Flint for a photo op, and that was it. Trump, he was going to fix the infrastructure of the country and all of that, and then he didn't do it. Okay. Marx supported of deed. All right. On top of that, now we have the Biden administration. And they've come out with a very great infrastructure plan. It looks very great. Now, I thought it was hilarious that in the Washington Post article presenting it, they practically had to apologize for their infrastructure plan. I mean, it was shocking to me. They had to actually apologize, and that some members of the Biden administration apparently believed that an infrastructure plan to improve the country was too white and male. I mean, that was shocking to me. But they've come out with a great infrastructure plan. Let's see if it happens, right? Trump had a pretty good infrastructure plan. Obama had a pretty good infrastructure plan, but they didn't fight for it, and they didn't make it happen. They didn't make it happen. In the 30s, Roosevelt, was able to carry out mass infrastructure reform in the United States. But the first step in a transition to socialism in the United States would be a massive mobilization to rebuild the United States of America, mobilizing the country, hiring all the unemployed people, to pay them good wages, to rebuild the country, high-speed railway, Wi-Fi in every corner of the country. At this point, we would need some irrigation, to irrigate parts of the country that are facing oncoming droughts, and as a result of climate change, we would need to rebuild the schools of the country, new hospitals throughout the country, new universities throughout the country, new infrastructure for the country. Just lay the basis for a whole remaking of the country, to be modern, to be technological, to not be falling apart anymore. Because if you look at the United States right now, it's falling apart. We're unpaving our roads. Our power plants generally explode. Look what happened in Texas. It happened here in New York during Hurricane Sandy. The power plant just blew up, right? You would need a mass mobilization to rebuild the country under the direction of the state with a 5-year plan. You would need, the smartest brains and scientists and engineers to be hired. You'd have to have a war room in the White House where it was like a war. It would be a war, and the military wouldn't be around the world fighting, other countries. The military would be involved as well. You would have to have a national mobilization and operation to reindustrialize the United States. Do we need, right? That would be the first step. A mass mobilization of Reconstruction. Step number 2, in order to pay for this program of Reconstruction, you would need public ownership of natural resources. Oil, natural gas, coal, timber. The natural resources of the country should become public property, right? They should become public property, right? Every citizen of the United States should have just as much access to the oil and the gas and the coal and the timber as Rockefeller and Carnegie and the Koch brothers and all the big energy capitalists do, right? The natural resources of the country should become public property, and the profits from them should be used to rebuild the country, right? We should use the profits from our oil and our natural gas to rebuild our country. Doesn't sound very radical, but in the surface it is, right? You're displacing a lot of billionaires and bankers who have made their careers impoverishing the United States while getting rich off of our natural resources. That would be step number 2. Step number 3, the lending of money should be a monopoly in the hands of the state. Credit should be assigned based on a national plan of reconstruction, right? Right now, banks lend money based on how much interest they can make. It's a for-profit operation. That would have to be gotten rid of. We would need to have the lending of money and the assigning of credit in the hands of the state. If someone wants to start a business, they would come to the local community, the state, the federal community, say, I want money to start my business. And if the business is deemed to be in the interest of the community, that money would be made available. If someone wants to buy a house, the state would lend money so they can buy a home, right? The lending of money, credit, would be in the hands of the state. No more credit card rip-off schemes, no more predatory mortgage lenders. The lending of money, banking, the assigning of credit, and the printing of money, too. The Federal Reserve would be gotten rid of. The lending of money, the printing of money, the stabilization of the economy, credit would be in the hands of the state, so it could be assigned strategically for the overall agenda of building a new America. That's step number 3. And step number 4 would be enacting an economic Bill of Rights with all the money that comes in from the natural resources, with all the money coming in from state centralization and monopoly of credit, with the boom in the economy coming from a new rebuilt, economy, new paved roads, everyone wanting to do business here because it's a great place to do business all of a sudden. It's not a crumbling, falling down country anymore. At that point, you would then want to have an economic bill of rights. You would want to guarantee every American the right to health care, the right to a job, the right to housing, right? Roosevelt proposed an economic bill of rights in his final State of the Union speech. And that would have to be enacted. And if you enacted those 4 steps, that would be a transition towards a state would be strong enough, and corporate power and the power of big bankers and monopoly corporations would be so effectively pushed back. You would have a state that would be at the center of a well-mobilized population. At that point, socialism would not be very far off. And in order to get this, what we're talking about, this the slogan of a government that would do those 4 things. I have raised the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families. A government of action, right? Not a government that's best because it governs least, not, get big government off our backs, not libertarianism, not a government that talks nice and makes nice promises, not a government that virtue signals, but a government of action. A government of action. Action. Swinging into action in order to carry out its goals. That's what is needed in the United States. A government of action to fight for working families, right? A government that swings into action, not to blow up and destroy Iraq, not to, destabilize Libya, but a government that swings into action to fight for working families. That is what is needed. A government of action to fight for working families. So there you go. Talk to Luna about. So there you go. That's where I'm at, folks. So now that we've resumed, I'm going to do the roll call, but please tweet this out. Get some folks back. People think it was over. Bring folks back. Bring folks back. Bring folks back. So tweet this out, post this on Reddit, post this on Facebook, post this on Twitter. Our conversation is continuing. We're going to go for a little while longer, maybe another half hour, 45 minutes. We're going to answer your super chat questions. So let's do our roll call, names and locations. Who is with us today? Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us tonight? Today. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? Names and locations. Brazil, Raphael. John in Houston. Workers' Party of Edinburgh. Mo in Toronto. West Palm Beach. Warrington, UK. Ben in Hungary. Montreal. Arturo in Anchorage, Alaska. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio. West Palm Beach. Chicago. Daniel from Happy Valley, Oregon. Sale in Manchester, UK. Danny from Eureka. Johnny from Philly at work. Glendale, California, Nick in Jack and Kill, Florida, Marta in Poland, West Palm Beach, Anthony in Detroit, Central North Carolina, Ryan in Oakland, South London, Brad in St. Louis, Michael in Ithaca, New York, Clydebank, West Virginia, Montebello, California, Steve in Michigan, Mike in California, Tristan in Maryland, Mikey Schilling in Billings, Montana, Troy in Casey, Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri, Aberdeen, Scotland, Brazil, Balthazar in Oakland, Pomona, California, Nate in Chicago, Elias from Finland, New York City, secret location, Canada, Cleveland, Ohio, Mohsen from Iran, Martin from Ireland, Kieran from San Diego, Venezuela, Vetting, Berlin, Mom Spaghetti, Denmark, Independence, Missouri, Jay from Texas, Orlando, Florida, very good. UK, Leipzig, East Germany, Independence, Missouri. Jason from Switzerland. Juan from Mexico. Very, very good. Very, very good. Great. Great, folks. Great. Anyone else? Names and locations. BT in the mountains of Vermont. Elias from Wisconsin. Very, very good. Red salute, y'all. Very, very good. Glad you all are here. Glad you all are with us. Good times, folks. Harold Sullivan in Naples, Florida. Our newest mod, Zach in Seattle, New Jersey, Roscoe, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Calgary, Zur Freeheit, Noah from Maryland, very good, Pasta Bazooka, Chile, Santa Clarita, Puerto Rico, very good, very, very good, Queens, New York, very, very good, Holly is Queens, New York, Good times, folks. Shaniqua from Buffalo is with us. Welcome, Shaniqua. You're also a mod. Very, very good. Alrighty, folks. Alrighty. Hawaii, Greece. There you go. Oh, thank you for the super chat. Alrighty, so, all right, let's start answering the questions here. Someone asked why leftists haven't broken with Western liberal democracy. Well, liberal democratic ideology is very widespread in the United States. And this is, there's a very important book called Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, where Lenin makes the point that ultimately this is not about just trying to make the mythology of democracy in the Western capitalist countries real, that rather what this is about, trying to get to a whole new society, and that democracy is an illusion. Until you can get to a society without classes. But as long as you have a society with classes, one class is going to have the upper hand. And then Marxism, advocating socialism, a dictatorship of the proletariat, in some ways is not, democratic, right? Just like capitalism is not democratic, because it's a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And that the goal is to get to a society where inequality has broken down, and that there are different classes, and that, different classes have vanished, and ultimately that will be far more democratic than anything we've seen under this system. But then even democracy itself fades away. The goal is to have a society with vast material abundance, right? But Western liberal democratic ideology, a lot of times, the way socialism is presented, the arguments that socialists make, are predicated on democracy. It's like, well, Western capitalism isn't democratic enough, right? They say it's a democracy, but the rich people rule. The rich people have all the money. That's not democracy. Well, that's true, right? That it's not really a democracy in the West when the rich have all the money. But at the end of the day, democracy itself, the concept of democracy, is a little bit of a screen. It's getting not to the essence of what the issue is. That inequality, the need for a state, all of this is rooted in scarcity. And capitalism maintains that scarcity with the problem of overproduction, the irrational use of resources, etc. Okay, the next question was about Vito Marcantonio. Vito Marcantonio was a member of Congress here in New York City. He represented Harlem in the House of Representatives. He was an Italian American. He was technically never a member of the Communist Party, but he was a very good friend of the Communist Party. And he was a member of the fraternal organization that the Communist Party led called the International Workers' Order, the IWO. He was a member of that. Folks, I'm actually going to kill the stream here for just a second. So we're going to have continued number 3, and I'm going to keep answering the super chats. We're going to have continued number 3. So I'm just going to take a quick 5-minute break. I have to check on something. So we're going to be ready for continued number 3. I'm going to take a quick break. This is a wild day, folks. So thank you for sticking with us. But I've got a whole bunch more super chats to answer, but I'm going to kill this. Oh, actually, I'm not going to kill the stream. Okay, it's going to be all right. I'm not going to kill the stream. I was almost about to kill the stream. I needed to check on something, but I don't need to kill the stream, so that's fine. Did you see that? I almost was about to kill the stream, and I didn't. So there you go. Now I'm not killing the stream. So isn't that wild? Isn't it wild how that works? So yeah, I almost killed the stream, and then I didn't. Money for anybody who thinks that you could figure out why I didn't kill the stream. But there you go, folks. What a day. So the next super chat question I got was Marxism and theology. The question was Marxism and theology. Well, Herbert Apotheker, who was a very important writer, he is the African-American scholar. He wrote The Truth About Hungary, exposing the Hungarian Revolt. There's an audio recording of a great lecture that he gave at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. It's online. It's on YouTube. You can listen to it. It's a recording of him speaking about the relationship between Christianity and communism. And he talks about Catholic priests in Latin America who become sympathetic to communism. And that's great. It's a great talk. But there's a lot that's also been written. I often recommend Karl Kautsky's book, The Foundations of Christianity. And that is considered the main scholarly Marxist examination of Christianity. So there you go. But what other books have been written on it? I mean, there's a lot that's been written about liberation theology, which is a form of Catholicism that embraces parts of Marxism. There's been a lot written about Christian socialism. Christian socialism predates Marxism, right? Henry Saint-Simon, Robert Owen, a lot of the early utopian socialists were Christians and drew from their faith heavily. So you can draw from that, but there's a lot on the concept of Marxism and theology. In fact, the Pledge of Allegiance of the United States was written by a Baptist minister, Francis Bellamy. And Francis Bellamy, he was a Baptist minister and a socialist. He was actually banned from the pulpit for the speeches he gave in Baltimore and in Boston that were so anti-capitalist and revolutionary. And in fact, his cousin was Edward Bellamy. And Edward Bellamy wrote a best-selling book. It was one of the most widespread books in the 1880s. And it was called Looking Backward. And it was a science fiction novel about a future socialist United States, a future socialist America. So you can read Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy, the very important Christian scientific socialist novel. I would encourage you to check that out. So there you go. I hope that answers your question, Chaya, about Marxism and theology. But hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Folks, tweet this out. Let people know we're still going here. And keep the super chats rolling in. I will answer your questions. So there you go. So once it increase the chat, more fuel. Well, maybe I should. My fuel is generally unnamed diet beverage. So maybe I should open another can. Right? There you go. So there you go. But yeah, folks, we'll just keep going here for a little bit. I'll keep answering the super chat questions, and then we'll kill the stream. So there you go. Soviet nostalgia. Someone asked about Soviet nostalgia. That's widespread. In Russia, there's a lot of Soviet nostalgia. So there you go. Okay, why don't American reach out to when they... Okay. Why not reach out to revolutionaries today? All right. Soviet nostalgia is very, very high throughout the world. It's very, very high in the former socialist countries of the Eastern Bloc. And there are different interpretations of it. I think, Stalin, for example, is very popular in Russia. But not everyone who likes Stalin is necessarily a communist. There are many who like Stalin because they see him as a hero who fought the Nazi invaders and defeated them, who industrialized the country. They see him from a Russian nationalist perspective. So it's complicated. Not all Soviet nostalgia is necessarily pro-communist nostalgia, right? There's a lot of nostalgia from a what you might call a nationalistic perspective, or nostalgia, for just opposition to the West. There's a lot of conservative anti-capitalism these days around the world. If you go to Iran, you go to Venezuela, you go to Russia, you go to China, there is a lot of criticism of capitalism from a kind of conservative approach. They argue that capitalism is breaking down the traditional family. They argue that the traditional ways of the people of various countries are being broken apart by the Western consumer culture. So there you go. Antifa and anti-China propaganda. Okay, all right. So Antifa, anti-China, new Red Scare. All right, we'll definitely talk about that. So how do we make Congress democratic? That was the next question. Well, again, democracy itself is a little bit of a misnomer, right? Because, again, as long as you have different classes in society, it's not going to be purely democratic. As long as you have different classes, it's not going to be a purely democratic society. There are many aspects of the U.S. Congress that you could call undemocratic. For example, every state, no matter how big it is, gets 2 senators. Vermont, the state of Vermont, for example, is a very small state. It has only 1 House of Representatives seat. There's only 1 representative in the House of Representatives for Vermont, but yet it still has 2 senators. And that, California and New York, they're very, very big populous states. They're huge population, right? California is the most populous state in the United States. There is no state in the USA that has more people than California, it only gets 2 senators, right? New York, at this point, New York is the 4th largest state in the country, still only gets 2 senators, right? And that the Senate, the way every state only gets 2 senators, that cancels out to some degree or other, popular will. And there's an overrepresentation of some sections of the population and an underrepresentation of others. In the U.S. Senate, I live in New York, my representation in the U.S. Senate is significantly underrepresented. I only get 2 senators, but yet I live in a state with a huge population. But if I lived in Vermont, I would be overrepresented because, again, I'd have 2 senators representing me, even though it's a tiny state. And so there are aspects, if you were to change the way the Senate was set up so that every state didn't get 2 senators, right? That might make it more democratic. But at the end of the day, the people with the money would still rule. The problem is capitalism. And the goal is not democracy per se. The goal is eliminating the power of big corporations, bringing the working class into politics, having a centrally planned economy, empowering people to make decisions in their lives, and moving beyond the irrational capitalist system. And yes, we will make a society that is more democratic, but the goal is to get even beyond democracy itself, to get to a world where people can just do what they feel like doing, from each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs, right? A vast material abundance laying the basis for a socialist society. That is the ultimate goal. So democracy itself gets a little murky because no society in the world ever has been a true democracy. Democracy means rule of the people. And all societies that exist in the world today have different classes in them. So they've never been rule of the people. And even within classes, right? Not every capitalist makes every decision, right? The capitalists have a huge amount of influence, but there are different factions among the capitalists. There are different interest groups fighting amongst each other, and so it's democracy is a bit of a smokescreen. In ancient Greece, the word democracy comes from Republican or Democratic rep and dem voters support socialism. For example, in ancient Greece, the word democracy. Oh, there's another super chat. Do you like hot dogs and do you eat them on the 4th of July? That's funny. Hot dogs. 4th of July. So there you go. Writing them down. All right. So the word democracy comes from ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, they argued there were different forms of government, and each government had a good version, and then it had a vulgarity, a distortion. They had the monarchy, which was considered to be good, but the monarchy was vulgarized into tyranny, right? In ancient Greece, they then argued you could have an oligarchy. And an oligarchy would be good, a rule by the elite, but an oligarchy could degenerate into plutocracy, the rule of the decadent rich. And then they argued that there could be democracy, the rule of the people. They argued there could be a republic, the rule of the people, but a republic, they argued, could degenerate into democracy, which was mob rule. And in ancient Greece, I believe it was Plato or Aristotle, one of them actually argued there was a cycle, that we go from monarchy to tyranny, and then we go from oligarchy to plutocracy, and then we go from republic to democracy, and then out of the chaos of democracy, we get monarchy once again. And that this is a cycle that Greek society would go through. They would go, the monarchy would degenerate into tyranny, and then they would have an oligarchy, but the oligarchy would degenerate into plutocracy. The plutocracy would then be replaced with a republic, but the republic would degenerate into democracy, and then we would go back to having a monarchy, right? And it was this cycle, right? And at the end of the day, not going to do that, but thank you though. Hey, right? At the end of the day, right, that in ancient Greece, you have to remember that all of these systems, monarchy, oligarchy, republic, all of this was a misrepresentation because it was a slave society. Very few people in ancient Greece were actually citizens. The overwhelming majority of the population of all the Greek city-states were slaves. So even in a quote-unquote republic, they didn't get a say. Women didn't get any say. Women were just not considered to be people. And even men, most of the men in ancient Greece were slaves who had no say. So the monarchy, the oligarchy, the republic, they were just different forms of less than 10% of society organizing itself to rule over the rest of society. So even in ancient Greece, these concepts were kind of bull honky. They were kind of bullshit, right? Democracy in ancient Greece was not democracy. It was rule of the full 10% of society, right? And it was an experiment about, in ancient Greece, they call it the cradle of Western civilization, the cradle of democracy. The concept of democracy itself was not even truly democratic. So there you go. There you go. All right. What is the U.S. equivalent of the peasantry? Well, I would argue that, after the overthrow of slavery, after the abolition of slavery in the United States, we set up in the South, you had the tenant farmer system, the sharecropper system, and that was very much similar to feudalism. Now, it technically wasn't feudalism. In feudalism, the way feudalism works, a lot of people don't know what feudalism is. Okay. Cuba, only true. All right, I'll answer that, and thank you for the super chat. But the way feudalism works is in feudalism you have the landowner, and then you have the peasantry. And the landowner, it's argued, is given the land by God. He's got the divine right to the land. He's a noble from birth. God has given him the land. This is reinforced by the church. And then the peasant works on the land, swears allegiance to the landowner, and works on the land. And in exchange for working on the land, they give the landowner some of the crops they grow, and then they can keep whatever is left over. And generally in feudalism, there are three groups of people. There are peasants, which are the overwhelming majority. Those are people who work the land. Then there are soldiers and priests who enforce the rule of the noble, and then there's the nobility, right? And then among the nobles, the head of all the nobles is the sovereign, the head of the country, the king, the head of state, right? And the king, rules over the nobles and keeps them in line. The nobles obey the king, and then below them you have this, the soldiers and the priests. The priests tell people that they must obey God and obey the system, and the soldiers enforce the the will of the nobles and execute people and make sure no foreign invaders come in, but also kill the serfs. And the peasants are the bottom layer of people who produce. They produce and they swear allegiance to an individual noble, and that's feudalism. Now, we never had full-on feudalism in the United States. Never did we have a full-on feudal system in the United States. We had something a lot like it, which was after slavery was dismantled in the South, a lot of the way the big slave plantations were reorganized was with sharecroppers. And these sharecroppers would rent a tract of land from the former slave owner, the former plantation owner. They would work it, and then they would weigh their crops, and a certain percentage of what they grew was given to the land owner. They got to keep what was left over. The reason that was different than feudalism was, first of all, the plantation owners, the big landowners of the South, were not declared to have divine right, right? It was not argued that God gave them the land. It was just that they owned it, number one. Number two, you were allowed to leave, right? A serf or a peasant is not allowed to leave, right? He's sworn allegiance to the noble. If he leaves, then he can be executed because he's, broken his bond. He's broken his oath to the nobleman, so he can be executed. That didn't happen, in the South. You were generally allowed to leave. And there was a great migration of black people to the North. So you were allowed to leave, generally. That's not to say, though, that a lot of the way the sharecropper and tenant farmer system in the South was set up, even though you were technically allowed to leave, you might not have been, right? Black people would be arrested all the time for things like vagrancy, and they talked about the way that the weighing, the crop thing was done, was often rigged. They even if they had a good year and they grew a lot, somehow the scales would be rigged to make sure that they didn't get it. But it wasn't just black people. It was white and black, the tenant farmer system. So you're asking, what is the U.S. equivalent of the peasantry? That would be the tenant farmer system. So there you go. And a lot of people don't understand what feudalism is. I just explained what feudalism is. A lot of people will say, like, oh, North Korea is feudalism. Why? Well, because the leader is the son of the previous leader. That's not what feudalism is, right? People will say that, if a country's if they argue a country's not democratic or something, they say it's feudalism. Well, no, feudalism is a particular mode of production. It is pre-industrial production. It's a form of subsistence farming. That's what feudalism is. You don't have factories in feudalism. You have a very limited market in feudalism. You'll have some market, right? And obviously somebody has to make the swords for those soldiers, and the spears for those soldiers, and somebody has to weave the clothes that people wear. So you have a limited market, but overall it is a system of subsistence farming, and that is feudalism, right? And it was the craftsmen, right? The craftsmen who weaved the clothes, who the blacksmiths who made the spears and swords and all of that, made the suits of armor, etc. Those craftsmen got involved in global trade, and that's what ultimately led to the downfall of feudalism. Is that because they started importing products from China, right? China, they had the Silk Road, and you had increasing international trade. The craftsmen gave birth to the mercantile class, the merchants who traveled around selling things you couldn't get in different places. And the mercantile class eventually gave birth to capitalism. So within feudalism, you had this layer, the craftsmen, who eventually gave birth to the forces that brought down feudalism. So there you go. Okay, someone asked me, did FDR turn JFK-esque in his final years of life? I don't know what that means, JFK-esque. In his final years of life, Roosevelt called for an economic Bill of Rights. Someone says they think I missed a super chat. What did I miss? Oh, social classes, the notion that social classes should never mix. All right, I'll write that down. All right. All righty. Social classes should never mix. All right. Well, there you go. Okay, so, all right. Did FDR become JFK-esque in his final years? I don't know what the person means by JFK-esque. In the final years of his life, Roosevelt called for an economic Bill of Rights. He was very friendly to the Soviet Union. And in fact, it's interesting. There's a song that Woody Guthrie wrote when Franklin Roosevelt died. And that song is called Dear Mrs. Roosevelt. And it's recorded by Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan doesn't sing one of the verses. There's one of the verses of the song that you can't find a recording of Woody Guthrie ever singing it. But the lyrics, look up the lyrics to Dear Mrs. Roosevelt. It says, this is one of the verses that's in the official lyrics by Woody Guthrie. He didn't like no Charles de Gaulle or no Chiang Kai-shek. But then he met with Stalin and said, here's a man I respect. I think that's how it goes, right? And that Roosevelt liked Stalin a lot, and Stalin liked Roosevelt. They respected each other. And Roosevelt called for an economic Bill of Rights. If you read the economic Bill of Rights, the right to housing, the right to a job, right? He emphasized that the goal after defeating the Nazis would be to raise the level of abundance, that fascism is created by hungry stomachs. And from what we understand, Roosevelt was planning to prosecute and seize the property of pro-Nazi capitalists. Henry Ford had collaborated with the Nazis. He was going to nationalize Ford Motor Company. He was going to nationalize the property of Coke, right? Coke had set up, Fanta Orange to be the Nazi drink. IBM, had run the punch card machines for the Holocaust. And that it's rumored, right? There's no way to really confirm this, that Roosevelt, after the war, wanted to nationalize the property of pro-Nazi capitalists and enact his economic Bill of Rights. So that could have been a big moment, but Roosevelt died, and his death was very convenient, right? He died just as the Cold War was getting going. His death was kind of perfectly timed, right? And Truman, who came in, Truman had been a Ku Klux Klan member. Truman had said that the USA should support whichever side was losing in World War II. If the Nazis were winning, they should support the Soviets. If the Soviets were winning, to support the Nazis, to weaken them both so the USA could dominate the world. Truman was not a good guy. And Roosevelt was anti-Israel, and that's worth pointing out. Roosevelt had no interest in creating Israel. He met with the pro-Israel lobby folks, and he insulted them. They said it was like meeting with a rattlesnake. So, history could have been quite different. If Roosevelt had lived, there might not have been a Cold War. There might have been some big economic nationalizations following World War II, and Israel may never have been created. So, Roosevelt could have been a very pivotal figure. Roosevelt was a Bonapartist. He was a Bonapartist figure. JFK never really became a Bonapartist. I think they feared that JFK might become a Bonapartist because he aligned himself with the civil rights movement and because he was standing up to the military-industrial complex. He wouldn't escalate Vietnam the way they wanted. So there you go. All right, Soviet intellectual achievements. It's a common myth that you hear that the Soviet Union, never had any intellectual achievements. That's a lie, right? The Soviet films were widely loved. The montage was invented by the Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein, and his films such as Ivan the Terrible, and what else? Ivan the Terrible, and Battleship Potemkin, October. These films are considered groundbreaking works of film. They are considered some of the most important films ever made. So there's that. What else? The music of Shostakovich. Shostakovich is considered one of the greatest composers of the 20th century. He was a Soviet composer, and they try to rewrite the narrative where he was, he was afraid of the Stalin regime. They try to downplay that, but that was a huge cultural achievement. Ballet, Soviet ballet was really something special. Really something special. People from all over the world would go to the Soviet Union, and watch the ballet that was performed there. Soviet ballet was really, really widely loved. What other cultural achievements did the Soviet Union have, right? In terms of science, right? Let's talk about the space program. Let's talk about that. There are many, many cultural achievements of Soviet society. They had many, many big advances. And one thing that they talk about in Soviet society was that the symphony was for everybody, right? In the USA, the concert halls are for rich people, but in the Soviet Union, average working people would go and listen to Beethoven and Bach and Mozart and Shostakovich. Best chess players, someone said, right? The Soviets, very, very high-achieving chess players. So, yeah, this idea that socialist societies crush intellectuals, they make people stupid, that's not true, right? Now, I think that largely there was a problem with intellectuals, and that's part of what led to the fall of the Soviet Union. That's part of what made Deng Xiaoping important, and how he corrected that in China. But, yeah, the achievements of Soviet society. Look, George Lucas, the filmmaker, was quoted as saying that artists and writers and directors in the Soviet Union had more intellectual freedom in what they could make, as long as they didn't, say things that were anti-government, than American filmmakers do. American filmmakers, they just have to do what the studio tells them to do. It's all about making money, and so the studio that's funding it is going to tell you, you got to do this, you got to do that. Whereas, in Soviet society, the directors had a lot more creative freedom as long as they didn't go against the party line, as long as they weren't pushing anti-communism, as long as they were not doing anything that would offend the communist leadership. They had a lot more artistic freedom. Whereas in the United States, our film industry is all about making money, and so the filmmaker is constantly being told by the company what to do and what not to do in order to maximize profits. So there you go. All right, long answer. We're getting low on time here, so I should probably start giving quick answers here. Io Hillary asked about things will not work well for the planet if capitalism is not overthrown. And Io Hillary is exactly right. We are facing a very, very big crisis politically, economically, climate change. If we don't have a rational use of resources, we don't have a planned economy and start utilizing our resources rationally, things are only going to get worse. The answer to climate change is central planning and getting beyond fossil fuels. We need fusion energy. All righty. Will the U.S. dollar collapse? I don't think the U.S. dollar will collapse, but I do think other currencies will get stronger. Already, we have African countries that are using Chinese currency. And the U.S. dollar, it's so valuable because it's used by so many different countries. But we may see, in response to the USA being ridiculous with its vaccine, in response to the Chinese economy and Russian economy surging ahead while the U.S. economy is floundering, we may see the U.S. dollar continue to be devalued. All right. Someone pointed out that Armenia and Azerbaijan, they got along under socialism, and now they're fighting with each other. And that's true. And, the oil fields of Azerbaijan were very important to Tsarist Russia, right? Because it was one of the first places to get oil, right? And the Rothschilds, they owned, some oil fields in Azerbaijan. And after the Russian Civil War broke out, the British army was sent to Azerbaijan to seize the oil fields from the Bolsheviks. And there was a lot of fighting in the Russian Civil War between the Bolsheviks and the British army. And it was mainly over the oil fields of Azerbaijan. That went on. And in the oil fields, there were Muslim workers and there were Christian workers. And part of what the Bolsheviks did was try to get, workers of different religious backgrounds to come together, right? And I mean, we know about the Armenian genocide that was conducted by Turkey and how horrendous that is. We have the United States finally acknowledging the Armenian genocide, there was a huge effort to bring people together. I know Putin, one of the criticisms he's made of the Soviet Union was he felt there was kind of an overemphasis on national differences, that because the Bolsheviks were very much into this concept of self-determination and emphasized nationality, that there was a big push to kind of emphasize national differences, right? And for a lot of these nationalities, like they'd never had a written language before, they enabled, it was the socialist revolution that enabled them to have a written language and to have, to celebrate their own culture. But at the same time, that emphasis on differences may have hurt the Soviet Union in the long term. The USA often would play up the idea that the Soviet Union was Russian chauvinist. What's interesting, though, is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, the vote to keep the Soviet Union was higher outside of Russia, right? More people in non-Russia, right? More people in parts of the Soviet Union that were not Russia, more people in places like Azerbaijan and Ukraine and places like that wanted to keep the Soviet Union than people in Russia did. And when the Soviet Union fell, a lot of the very small countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia were devastated by it because their economic growth had been tied in with being part of the Soviet Union. And that's why the vote to maintain the Soviet Union was higher in the smaller republics than it was in Russia. No one talks about that. But at the same time, I'm sure there were mistakes that were made. Look, there were issues with how Muslims were treated in Central Asia that were problematic. Let's not pretend that there weren't bad things that went on. And it's also important to note, and this is important. My goodness, I'm going on another tirade. That's important. Look, the role of German intelligence in the Russian Revolution is important. There is an individual by the name of Parvus, Alexander Parvus, and he arranged for Lenin to return to to Russia, right? Lenin was in exile, and World War I was going on, and Lenin was against World War I. And Parvus, a social democrat who was elected, was a leader of German social democracy, but was also a German intelligence officer, arranged for Lenin to return to Russia, right? And, Lenin basically got used, by German intelligence because they wanted to end Russia's involvement in World War I. And part of the reason that Parvus picked Lenin to be the guy that he funded and enabled to go back to Russia was because of Lenin's belief in national independence, right? He basically said, Lenin, we're going to give money to Lenin and send him back to Russia because he believes, not only does he want to end the war, but he believes in Russian independence. So even if he's not able to actually overthrow capitalism in Russia, he will encourage the different ethnicities throughout, Russia and the surrounding countries to revolt. Because Lenin was all about Ukrainian independence, Armenian independence, Armenia, and because Lenin emphasized the struggle of nationalities against Russia, he called the Russian Empire the prison house of nations. Because of that, it was deemed that, okay, well, maybe if Lenin doesn't have a successful revolution, at least he will divide the Russian Empire. At least he'll be able to break it up. So the Germans, for their own reasons, that was part of the appeal. That's why Alexander Parvus, the German intelligence officer, arranged for Lenin to be transported back to Russia. What's also interesting is that Alexander Parvus, the German intelligence officer, is the creator of Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. Trotsky did not invent his theory of permanent revolution. A German intelligence officer did. Alexander Parvus is the guy who invented the theory of permanent revolution. And why would German intelligence want there to be permanent revolution around the world? Well, I mean, if you're Germany, you're the rising imperial power that's facing off against the Americans, and it's facing off against the British, you would want there to be chaos and instability in all the places controlled by the British and the Americans. And, Russia is your enemy. You want to fight against the Russians. So the theory of permanent revolution was actually invented by an intelligence officer. Like the German CIA invented the theory of permanent revolution, and Trotsky started repeating it. So you have to wonder how, that's very telling, and no one talks about that. So there you go. All righty. Now, someone said language, Wittgenstein, and calling countries socialist. Look, language does not define reality, right? This is a big debate. There's materialism versus idealism. Thinking doesn't make it so, right? And this is big in U.S. society. The idea that you can try, if you just try hard enough, you can do anything. No, that's not true. I could never be an Olympic gold medalist, no matter how hard I tried. I don't have the body for it, and that's not because I just didn't will it enough. It's because I don't have the body for it, right? Now, I can do other things, and I have worked very hard, and I have tried a lot of things, but they're things that I'm capable of. And, that material defines reality, and that thoughts are a reflection of reality. Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. I am, therefore I think, not I think, therefore I am, right? The mind does not create reality. The reality creates the mind, right? The reason I think is because I have this material thing in my head called a brain, right? And that this mistake of idealism. Wittgenstein was a philosopher who said that words define reality, language defines reality. Well, there's a lot of that in the socialist movement. I think the person who sent the super chat, what they were referring to is the fact that a lot of people say, well, this country is not socialist because it doesn't call itself socialist, or this country is not socialist because it doesn't feel socialist to me. I mean, when I was a Maoist, I tried really hard to believe that the Soviet Union had restored capitalism in 1956, but I could not find any economic basis for making that argument. However, I would read these books where they would say that the Soviet Union stopped being socialist because it didn't feel socialist, right? The ballets in the Soviet Union didn't have the liberatory energy, right? I mean, there's a debate between the RCP economist Raymond Lotta and the Marxist-Leninist economist Albert Szymanski. And it's a debate. You can read it on the internet about, was the Soviet Union really socialist? And I remember reading this debate when I was trying my hardest to believe the Raymond Lotta position. But I just couldn't be convinced. Raymond Lotta's arguments are bunk. He says the Soviet Union's not socialist because the ballet is different. He says the Soviet Union's not socialist because when Soviet engineers go around the world, they speak in a condescending tone to the people in the developing world. That's not Marxist analysis. Words, feelings don't define reality. Reality is a result of words and feelings. Words and feelings are a result of reality. And that's the problem. And that, look, there are many countries around the world that reject Marxism, right? Libya rejects Marxism. I mean, under Gaddafi's leadership, they rejected Marxism. But if you looked at how the economy of Libya operated, it was a socialist economy. Ba'athist Arab socialism is socialism. Bolivarianism is socialism, right? And that reality is not defined by someone getting up and saying, I believe in Marxism-Leninism. This is Cold War dogmatism. And that the really existing socialism of the Cold War, right? Soviet-style socialism, it had its great achievements, and I will defend its achievements, but the adjustments that were made by Deng Xiaoping, the adjustments made in Vietnam with the socialist market economy, the adjustments that we've seen more recently, in Cuba and other places were necessary. That model will not return, just like the Paris Commune will not return. All right. Someone says Marx supported propaganda of the deed. I don't agree with that. Based on what I understand, Marx rejected the use of terrorism and left adventurism. He polemicized very strongly against Ferdinand Lassalle, against Louis Auguste Blanqui, and other figures who advocated that. But I'll have to look into that, sir. I've never seen that argument. All righty. Do we need to reindustrialize the United States? Yes, we do need to reindustrialize the United States. We need to rebuild this country, break the United States out of the global system of monopoly capitalism, build a sustainable, rational economy in the USA. All right. Talk to Luna about the synthetic left. Well, I already did. Watch my conversation with Luna. I had a great, chat well over an hour with Luna. We talked about many topics, and we talked about Trotskyites and phony leftism. We actually did talk about that. So go and watch my conversation with Luna. But I'd be happy to talk to Luna again. I was listening to Luna last night talk about these fake Vietnamese leftists on the internet who were bashing her and saying shit about Vietnam. And Luna is great. I love Luna. I love her work. You know, she's amazing. And I'm careful. I go into the chat, and whenever I go into the chat, I like to give her super chats and things like that. But I've noticed that every time I do that, the chat degenerates into a conversation about me, and I don't want to do that to her. That's not fair to her, right? It's her stream, right? So every time I go in and I give her a super chat, then all of a sudden the chat starts having an argument about Caleb, and that's not fair to her because it's her stream, okay? So a lot of times I lurk when I watch Luna because I don't want to, the chat. And it's like some of these people are just programmed. They're just like so brainwashed into hating me. The second that I give her a super chat or I just make my presence known in the chat, immediately these people have to go into, he's a Nazbol. Oh, I heard somebody tell me he's bad. And then it becomes an argument about whether I'm good or bad. Well, it's her stream, and that's not fair to her. We got to have to be polite, you know what I mean? And that's really rude of people to do. I mean, these people hate me so much that they can't go into Luna's stream without, seeing me there and then deciding, oh, Caleb's no good. It's like, give me a break. Grow up, people, Why do we not reach out to revolutionaries today? Like the person's talking about how in the 20th century, people were taking direct inspiration from Mao or from Lenin, but now we don't do that. And I think that's because many socialist countries don't, this permanent revolution stuff, the Trotskyism, right? The idea that there's one ideology for the whole world and socialist countries' job is to be exporting armed violence around the world. We've gotten over that. In the 20th century, we learned that Trotskyism and permanent revolution was wrong. We also learned that you cannot build an egalitarian society. You cannot build an egalitarian society on the basis of scarcity, right? So you can't, no matter how ultra-revolutionary Cuba's leaders are, you can't build socialist heaven on earth on Cuba until they reach a level of material abundance to facilitate the breakdown of inequality. So I think that socialist countries around the world approach people around the world differently. They say, look, we're building socialism in our country. Here's the methods we use. But they don't try to tell people that their ideology, they don't try to set up a global Maoist movement or a global, Soviet-aligned movement. That we've matured. We've gotten beyond that, right? That socialism nowadays is much more pragmatic. It's about, how can we use socialist methods to build a good society? So there you go. All right. Okay, someone said, is the anti-Antifa stuff and the anti-China hysteria creating a new Red Scare? I wouldn't put it that way. I think that the right wing in the United States, that's what they've got. That's what they got, right? The communists are bad. Left-wingers are all communists. The USA, when we were defeating communists in the 80s, was a great country. Now the USA has fallen apart, so... It's boomer stuff, right? It's a lot of these older folks. They remember the good old days when no one in the USA ever talked about communism and when the U.S. economy was good. And it's part of LARPing Ronald Reagan for the old folks, the people who watch Fox News and watch the stair climber ads and, the Viagra commercials, those folks, they remember back in the day when America was this right-wing McCarthyist, anti-communist country. And so it's about nostalgia for those folks, I think, is more what it's about. It's a propaganda tactic. But it's also, it's based on the fact that the synthetic left is trying to wage war on, working people. I mean, the synthetic left thinks working people are the enemy. Let's be real about it. I mean, the phony synthetic left, they think average American workers are a bunch of, racist hillbillies who need to be shamed for their privilege. They think that talking about jobs is racist. They think, trying to reindustrialize the country is racist. And that they're waging a culture war against middle America. They think Christianity is an evil religion because it's not woke enough or something. And that the synthetic left, the cult, the cult of destruction, right? The chaos cult, right? The postmodern, there is no truth, burn it down, that grouping, they are kind of waging war against middle America. And so the demagogues on the right, they say, well, that's communism. And don't you hate that? Well, it's not communism. That's the synthetic left. Communism is about loving your community, loving your country, breaking down racism, breaking down divisions, building working class unity and building a whole new country, right? Communism is a patriotic ideology. Communism is a constructive ideology. And the synthetic left is the goon squad of the ultra-rich in their fight against the lower levels of capital. And it's a different thing. And that's why we need to differentiate ourselves. We need to be the constructive socialists, the patriotic socialists, the community-loving socialists, the proud of ourselves socialists. That's why we got to wear suits. That's why we got to talk differently. We need to make clear that the ideology of Mao and Fidel Castro and Ho Chi Minh and William Z. Foster and Huey Newton is not the ideology of the woke mobs. It's not. Okay. Do I eat hot dogs? Yes, I do like hot dogs. And do I eat them on the 4th of July? I mean, I would. I don't recall ever doing that, but I'm not opposed to that. So there you go. All right. Is Cuba the only true democracy in the world? No. There's no true democracy in the world, I would argue. The democracy, like I said, as long as you have different classes, you're not going to have pure democracy. But I will say about Cuba that one thing that distinguishes Cuba, like other anti-imperialist states, is that the state in Cuba depends on a huge involvement of the population. The population is well mobilized to support the socialist state. And it's the same in Iran. It's the same in China. That anti-imperialist states, in order to stay in power, they depend on a well-mobilized population that carries out their goals on a community level. And so that's very, very democratic. So even when these countries are authoritarian, when they don't have the same level of free speech that we have, they're still more democratic, because here in the United States, we're not participating in community decisions. We're kind of locked out, we're demobilized. Whereas in socialist and anti-imperialist states, the population is well organized, and has a lot of input into how the state carries out its goals. All right. The idea that social classes should never mix. No, I think that people should speak with people from all different strata of life, and that meeting people from different economic and social layers is a good thing. I don't like the idea, many times my frustration with the synthetic left has been that there are people from wealthier backgrounds who, even though they claim to be socialists, do have this kind of arrogant, I'm better than you, I don't need to acknowledge you attitude. And that's okay as long as, it's this weird, there's a lot of white Americans who are left-wing who have a white savior complex. And so they look at black people in a very condescending way and say, oh, you're a poor, oppressed black person, number one. And then they look at white workers as their mortal enemy, and they call themselves communists. Well, I'm sorry. If you're a communist, number one, you recognize the amazing leadership of black people like, Huey Newton, people like Minister Louis Farrakhan, people like, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and you admire the heroic struggles of black people, and you respect black people and their ability to fight for their own rights, number one. And number two, you see white workers as oppressed by capitalism. And while they may have backward ideas, you want to struggle with them and get them to unite with black people in the struggle against imperialism. So that white savior complex view of, that you get from that, synthetic left element, where it's like, on the one hand, they condescend to black people and see black people as just inferior victims, number one. And number two, they think white workers and working class white people are their mortal enemy. That is not Marxism, but that's how most, left folks view the world. They view the world that way, and it's offensive to black people, it's condescending to black people, and it's offensive to white workers in the United States. We need to get beyond that. We need to get beyond that, right? We need to get beyond that. We need to have a class solidarity perspective. Alrighty. Bitcoin. I don't know enough about Bitcoin. I can't really comment on it. So, all right, folks. So it's been a wild afternoon. We had to interrupt the stream, and I had to go someplace else, but it's fine. Everything's going to be all right. And tonight, I will see, depending on how things go, I'll have to make sure. I think I will react to Joe Biden's speech tonight. I think I will. I'll be tweeting all throughout it, so follow my Twitter. But I will react, I think. I'll do a reaction live stream to Joe Biden's speech. So tune in for that. Tune into that. It'll be fun. So we're going to end this afternoon stream. I'm heading to the office. I'm going to cover Biden's speech, and based on how things go, I think I'll do a reaction. So let's cut it off here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. The people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.